I'm sure you'll want to join in this discussion this evening on this University of the Airwaves. Well, as more or less exclusively predicted by me, it's President Trump in the battle between the devil and Beelzebub. One of them won. And we'll come on to what that means for America and for the world, because this is the mother of all talk shows. Of course, now President-elect Donald Trump, as predicted by me as far back as May in Twitter, and again earlier this month, and again as the polls closed and before a single exit poll or result had been notified. How do I do it? Well, first of all, the bookies are well lucky that I don't do gambling. So's the National Lottery, because having predicted the Scottish referendum result to a percentage point, having predicted the Brexit result to a percentage point, I was right again. How so? Well, unlike the army, and I mean army, of pundits, pollsters and politicians in the mainstream media, I actually understand what's going on in the political world. The rest of them are mere echo chambers of the rich and powerful. That's the truth of the matter, and you could measure it with the length of the faces of most of the pundits and panelists throughout the night in the US election coverage. The truth is, I understand the forces that are at work. And here's what they are. People are sick and tired of the elite, of the establishment, of the power, of the experts, of the people in the bubble in Westminster and in Washington. They are sick and tired for good reason. First of all, these people have got everything wrong and have led us to the sorry pass we are now in. And secondly, whilst they're doing it, they're filling their own pockets and the pockets of their friends at the expense of the rest of us. And that goes for this country just as much as it goes for the United States of America. And I'll come back to that later in the show, because anyone who thinks that the kind of corruption that has poisoned the American body politic doesn't exist here is fooling themselves. It exists here, and it exists on the mainland of the European continent and in almost every country of the world. Second point, people want to live in a national economy. A national economy that they can relate to and that they can have some say over through the democratic process. They don't want globalization. They don't want supranational political structures over which they can exercise no influence, let alone control. Thirdly, it is a matter of fact that and I'm putting this word heavily in quotation marks because I don't accept its premise, the liberal, unquote, consensus of how we must run our societies and what our priorities must be are not the priorities of the great majority of people in the countries concerned, and even including some of the minorities or significant parts of those minorities for which it is always claimed that we have developed these priorities. What do I mean? Well, since Donald Trump's victory, which became, I suppose, crystal clear around 8 or 9 in the morning on Wednesday, I was up all night, I may get the hours slightly wrong, the first horse out of the trap, and it's running still, is that this was a white lash. That this was a triumph of racism, of bigotry, and of misogyny. The main problem with that narrative is that it is completely wrong and debunked by the Bible of the New York Times exit poll, the most extensive polling to date of the American presidential election. Let's deal with the white lash first. The thesis that Trump won because of a huge surge of racist white people coming to the polls that hadn't been at the polls for quite some time. Here's a startling fact. Donald Trump got 1% more white votes than Mitt Romney had gotten in 2012. Let's deal with the misogyny. I saw Yvette Cooper on Question Time last night opining that Hillary Clinton lost because she's a woman. This is equally bogus. Hillary Clinton got 1% more women's votes than Barack Obama got in 2012. So there was no white lash and there was no evidence at all that Clinton lost because she was a woman. Of course, Trump's vulgar, oafish, brash, thuggish, almost at times in some of his rallies, fascistic exultation in the need to triumph over what he called political correctness makes him hard to love. And just in case you're in any doubt, I don't love Donald Trump one little bit. In fact, I despise him. But here's the rub. I despise Hillary Clinton more. I think that Donald Trump's presidency could be dangerous, but it's almost certain that it would not be as dangerous as a Clinton presidency would be. I think that Donald Trump's economic prescriptions for curing the economic ills of the United States may well not be tried. If they're tried, may not work. But I am certain that the neoliberal orthodoxy, which saw Wall Street throw hundreds of millions of dollars into Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, would not only not have worked, but are the reason for the deep malaise that exists in the United States. And on the question of race, let me add this. Donald Trump got 30% more Latino votes than Mitt Romney had got in 2012. He got 8% more black votes than Mitt Romney had got in 2012. And he got 11% more Asian votes than Romney in 2012. So, there was not a surge of women voting for Hillary Clinton. There was a 1% rise. And 66% of white women voted for Donald Trump. There was not a flight of Latinos or a surge of Latino votes. All the narrative that we were fed day and daily was completely bogus. And if you think about it, and I knew this when they were saying it, why would a legal Latino immigrant be against Trump because of his plan to stop the flow of illegal Latino immigrants into the country? Why would they care about a wall being built across the Mexican border? Not least because Trump was promising the Mexicans would pay for it, when that would actually staunch the flow of wage and job competitors for the Latino immigrants already in the country. We have to shake ourselves free of this vice of identity politics. The all black people, all Latino people, all Asian people, all gay people vote as a bloc because of that part of their identity. Because here's the truth. As Bill Clinton famously said in his first presidential election, it's the economy, stupid. It's true that whilst Trump is ahead in the popular vote this evening, there are many votes in California still to be counted, which may give Hillary Clinton the majority of the popular vote. But as everybody listening to this knows, because of the sage John Le Boutellier's regular tutorials, it's not about the popular vote. It's about the Electoral College. And here's the point. Trump won in Florida, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, and in Michigan because of the economy. Because the rust bucket of the northern industrial states have had enough of neoliberal economics, had enough of Wall Street, had enough of all those people who lobbed so much money into Hillary Clinton's election coffers. Now, Trump has a plan that will put these people back to work. It may or it may not come to pass. But the one thing they were sure of, because, as she frequently told us, they had a lot of experience of Hillary Clinton's experience, and they knew that it hadn't worked for them. And that's the same reason why Brexit triumphed in the European referendum, and it's the same reason why François Hollande in France will be lucky to be third in the presidential elections next year. It's the same reason why Jeremy Corbyn swept to power twice in the Labour Party, because people have had enough of the establishment, of the elite, of the political class. First thing he dropped was that these were rigged elections. That one will never be heard out of his lips again. Second one he dropped was banning Muslims coming to the United States. That was wiped off his website in less than 24 hours. I predict there will be no wall across the Mexican border, and I'm certain that Mexico will not pay for it. You can't always get what you want, and Donald Trump said a lot of foolish things, but he obviously struck a chord, and that chord has put him en route to the White House. So who better to turn to than our sage, John Le Boutelier, former US Republican congressman, who talks us through all important American political developments. John, welcome to the show.
George, I'll give you another one that's disappeared. A 2012 tweet from Donald Trump that we ought to get rid of the Electoral College.
Yes.
He tweeted it, and my numbers in the New York Times as of a couple hours ago now, it's an estimate of where we're headed, that Hillary will end up winning the popular vote by more than 2 million votes, 1.5% of the total vote, and she will win, with quotation marks around it, a bigger victory in the popular vote than Richard Nixon did when he was elected president, JFK when he was elected president. How about that? So there's Trump again on the wrong side of something and quickly scrambling and getting rid of what he said.
Well, he of course has a near miraculous ability to do that, not just in politics, but in business. He makes all kinds of outlandish statements and claims and then just walks away from them. Many of these we're hoping he does walk away from. But what about the ones that are less likely? The reason why some people voted for him. The reason why, on balance, I'd rather that he won it than Hillary Clinton won it. Namely, that he's not likely to take us into a war with Russia, meaning you and I won't have to go and live in New Zealand. Is he going to hold to that? Is there going to be an improvement in American-Russian relations? Or will these Heritage Foundation types that seem to be buzzing around him now correct that pre-election pledge too?
Well, it's a lot there, and I can't say for sure. The funny thing is, we're here on November 11th, He's been running for president and now president-elect for a year and a half when you add it all up. And he really has never had to put up as opposed to shut up. He just talks, and he's gotten away with it. But when we get to February and March, there's going to have to be substance of some sort on something. Now, the number one concern of the Republican voters who voted for him, absolutely the number one thing, is getting rid of Obamacare, the health care plan that the president passed 6 years ago, and is very unpopular in America, and universally unpopular, George, among Republicans. And they are pledged to getting rid of it. But when you look at what goes into getting rid of it and replacing it, that is a nuclear landmine that Trump is about to step into, because there is no replacement for it short of the dreaded public option or
socialism,
single-payer plan. Yeah, socialism. Yeah, which, by the way, Donald Trump favored several years ago. He favored a single-payer plan, and you and he share something, George. Scottish heritage.
Yes.
And he has said he wants a health care plan similar to the one in Scotland.
Well, I second that. No, but what about their second priority now, especially those in those great industrial or post-industrial states? Jobs. The halt of the export of their factories and their livelihoods to other countries. Will he do anything about that?
Well, he'll try to. He says, and what he's pledged to do is to cancel, renegotiate, change all these trade deals. Between you, me, and the lamppost, the trade deals are not the reason the factories are closed and the jobs are going overseas. The only reason is the cost of labor. The cost of labor in America is quite high, and the cost in Bangladesh or wherever is very low. Vietnam, places like that. And that's not going to be changed by Donald Trump putting pressure on companies not to close factories and all. It's just not going to change.
He said he'll put a tariff,
didn't he? It's the way of the world, unfortunately.
Well, it's the way of the globalized capitalist world, and that's what people are revolting against. Now, one of the solutions he proposed was that if you close your factory and move the jobs elsewhere, we'll put a tariff on what you produce there, and you won't be able to sell it in America. This will not go down well with the Heritage Foundation types, but it will be expected by the blue-collar workers, the kind of Reagan Democrats that obviously put him in places like Ohio and Michigan.
Right, correct. That is correct.
So will he do it? Can he do it?
He's going to try to do it. He's going to do some of it. But he'll by the time he has the power to do it, if there's another issue floating around, he'll go morph over there. I've watched Trump here in New York for 35 years. The guy is strange. What he says today means nothing tomorrow. Absolutely nothing. And I think that what will happen is they're hiring people already to run this transition, and they're hiring all insiders, lobbyists, people down in Washington who, live down there and live off of it, and they're going to surround Trump with smart people. They're going to capture Trump. They're going to convince him of things that he didn't know, and he'll change. And he won't be so big. I mean, he used to be pro-choice on abortion. Okay, he did a complete 180. Now he's pro-life. This guy will switch on anything in a moment. And once he has these people telling him certain things, I think even global warming, which is a zero issue in the Republican Party, and which he claims is a hoaxed up conspiracy from the Chinese. I think the reason Obama and Trump met for 90 minutes yesterday is I think Obama began bringing Trump down the learning curve on what is happening with global warming and the costs and the problems that it's bringing about. And I wouldn't be surprised if by February Trump is a believer in this thing.
Now, I don't know if you saw Peter Sellers' last film, Being There, where...
Oh, my God, are you kidding me? That is this. Chauncey Gardner.
Chauncey Gardner is Donald Trump.
Chauncey Gardner didn't want to be president. This guy does. That's the only difference.
So the question is he a genius, or is he a dolt?
He's a marketing genius. He's really good at marketing. He's not a dolt. He's not a dolt, and we shouldn't think he's a dolt. He's not. He's a marketing genius with many problems: attention deficit disorder, narcissistic personality syndrome, and all that goes along with that. He's emotionally not up to being president, but he is going to be president. And what I guarantee you, all these things we saw in the campaign are going to flare up again. The anger, the blaming people, the zany craziness, it will come back in the White House when the pressure's on. He can't take pressure.
Well, we're going to have plenty to talk about, John. I think you'll need to be here every week to bring us up to date on the latest twists and turns. John Labutilli, as always, my hat is raised for you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, George,
for joining us. Ford has tweeted, I think the people that are going to be most disappointed by a Donald Trump presidency will be Donald Trump supporters in the end. And 1% says if Soros goons say it's a white lash often enough, the sheep believe it. And Marie Kate says, calm down, man. People are sick of being told what to do by the USA when they don't even know a Trump from a burp. Well, look, I'll be candid with you. What Trump does in the United States is entirely a matter for them. It's entirely a matter for the people of the United States. He can build walls, he can print money, he can set off on a new deal like no other, of public infrastructure, of hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, care less about how they're going to pay for it. That's all their business. My business is I don't want the United States of America to be coming over here or over there, telling other people how they should run their countries. For me, it's self-evident that the United States has enough problems of its own to be going on with. So leave everybody else alone. Leave the Middle East. Leave the Far East. Leave Southeast Asia. Leave Russia. Leave China. Leave Europe to do what it thinks is best for it. That's my take on it. And I think that Trump will be more likely to do that than Clinton would have been. We know that Clinton wouldn't have done that. We don't know that Trump will not, but there's a possibility that he will not. Let's hear from Josh in London. Go ahead, Josh.
Hi, George.
Hi, mate.
I've called to agree with you, which is a strange feeling.
Okay.
I think I was following the election and Clinton's campaign. It just seemed to offer very little. There was no responsibility for the mistakes we all know she's made. She wasn't visiting most of the country, and she was talking in that kind of bland Blairite truism way, where I can see why voters felt no connection to her. And just like you were saying, when she talked about Russia or China, they were just like an enemy or a threat or the thing that's taking over America, and it was totally, it was even scarier than whatever Trump was saying that day.
I think it was. I genuinely think it was. She basically ran on more of the same. She ran as a third term for Barack Obama. But that could only work if people were happy about their lives under Barack Obama. And they manifestly were not.
I'd go as far as to say that people would have been quite happy with an Obama third term, and that a lot of the things they didn't like about Obama were things Hillary did in the first place, or her sort of right-wing lot of the Democrats.
Yeah. Well, they had an alternative, didn't they? They had Bernie Sanders, whom they cheated out of the Democratic nomination, and who, all the polls say, would have beaten Trump hands down.
I think that's true to an extent, and also Bernie, he had his shot, and then he said, enough with the emails, and he couldn't win it when he had the shot, which is sad, but seems like America's going to get 4 years of austerity now, which, like you say, I don't mind. They can rack up the debts even more and hopefully stay out of the rest of the world's business a bit.
Well, he's pledged to cut taxes for the very rich, and he's also pledged to a massive Rooseveltian New Deal style public infrastructure program. That leaves the question how that's going to be paid for, with declining national revenues through tax cutting, but increasing public spending for job creation and infrastructural purposes. Now, is he just going to quantitatively ease and ease and ease? Maybe. In which case, what about China, which holds a very large percentage of America's debt? Will they call it in? Will they cooperate with it? Will they demand a share of it? I don't know how that's going to work, Josh, do you?
I actually wrote my dissertation on it, funnily enough.
Okay, tell us.
Well, you have to consider that China, because its population is so big, it's mostly a second or third world country. So if America owes them 10 trillion, that's like, excuse me, about £10,000 for each Chinese person, which sounds like a lot, but when the average income is, a couple of grand a year in a lot of places, China is like determined to have America for the next 50 to 100 years top of the tree, so they can sort of, sometimes in life it's more comfortable being in second place, because then you don't have to be the world police. So I think the debt's going to get, particularly like the first couple of years of Trump, it's going to go through the roof. And then maybe it will give the Democrats a chance to sort of find the next younger Bernie and try and take on the... I think the thing I hated most about the Clintons is that whatever Thatcher and Reagan did, they made it 5 or 10 times worse, where finance just took over everything.
Well, they talk liberal talk, especially on issues of gender and race and sexual orientation.
Yeah.
But their modus operandi is to take money from any gutter snipe that passes them by and fill their own pockets, and when in power, pursue neoliberal policies which beggar millions of ordinary working people. And that's why she lost. It's not because she was a woman, it's because people saw her for the kind of woman she was.
I just see Hillary as like hipster Thatcher. The way Thatcher was like, there's no such thing as society. Hillary's going to say women, minorities, anything, as long as it makes up 51% of the vote. And there was just no ambition, nothing to offer. And yeah, I think it was much worse than anything, any criticism you can have of Obama.
Well, good call, Josh. Thanks very much for making it. We're talking Trump. Neil Barrington is too. He tweets, "He won, George, against all the odds. Even though I dislike his policies, a bit of me is delighted about the anti-establishment." Well, he was against big money, all the big money. Clinton outspent him almost 3-1. He spent more on campaign souvenirs and memorabilia than he did on focus groups and opinion polling. Who made the right call there? He had virtually the entire print media in America against him. He had the vast majority of the broadcast media on television against him. He had most of the grandees in his own party against him. And he still won. And we've got to try and work out why and what it means for the rest of us. Sam's on the line in New York. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Sam.
George, good to talk to you again.
And you, sir.
So like you said, if Bernie was the nominee, because the polls showed him on average he had 10 points over Trump, where Hillary's average was maybe about 5 over Trump. But why Trump won is, again, it's on the Democratic side, though, it's Hillary lost her base. And there's like 3 main reasons, I think, for that. One is, she dismissed Bernie Sanders supporters. She actually would refer to Bernie Sanders supporters as, Bernie bros, or to say, oh, well, you're sexist, which is insane. I bet she did the same tactic when she ran against Obama, the whole Obama voice.
Yeah.
But on top of that, she would say, oh, I'm a progressive, and yet she was on stage in Ohio where she stood with James Cladd. He was the, as you know, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State to George Bush, a massive neocon. And she gives him a speech about American exceptionalism in that we need to go places and we need to lead the world in democracy, which is just code for war, war, war. But what struck a lot of progressives because, we have the age of the internet and we're not stupid in the sense of how much money the foundation was taking from foreign governments. Saudi Arabia gave $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation when she became Secretary of State. Oh, look at that, weapon deal gets approved. Meanwhile, this country is bombing one of the poorest country at a 50% civilian casualty rate. Very frequently, they had to admit that Bill Clinton got $1 million from the Qatar government for his birthday. That's a heck of a birthday gift, George.
Yeah. I wonder, was it inside a birthday card, or did it come in a brown envelope, or what?
I wouldn't know.
They took money. They took money from the worst people on the earth, all the while telling us how liberal they were.
Well, when you take money from governments who, as the New York Times rightfully wrote, like Saudi Arabia is the ISIS that made it, you can't then say, well, you care about civilians, and that's why we need to intervene in Syria. And as Robert Kennedy Jr. wrote an article, I think in EcoWatch, he said, it's all about a pipeline that Qatar wants to run through Syria into Europe. So we're aware that this is all a pay-to-play nonsense. But with Trump, though, he, despite the fact he profited from outsourcing, he had the faux populist. He had the faux populist message that, whereas Bernie was a real populist and had fought against all these trade deals, he was saying, oh, no, I'm against it. And in states like Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Ohio, where they were hurt most from these trade deals, he would just more or less say, look, you may not like me, but hey, I'm opposing these deals, and the people feel a little bit better.
Is he going to live up to that, Sam? Is he going to live up to the anti-capitalist message he had in the former industrial areas?
Well, when you yourself have outsourced your jobs, I don't think you're in a position to then say, I'm going to go against it. But, I don't know. The thing with Trump is, he's a flip of a coin. Heads maybe, tails no. But the only plus, George, I'm a guy of, the glass is half full. The only plus I see is his foreign policy. And in the sense of where Hillary was wanting a no-fly zone, where she says, no boots on the ground, and all the analysts says you would need at least 50,000 U.S. soldiers to implement the no-fly zone, not to mention violating a country's, sovereignty and having to, take out air defense. George, I believe you were the one who spoke in Parliament when you were saying these people that we're funding are not rebels. They're not moderates. I believe you said that somebody was eating a human heart.
Yep.
And
it's on YouTube. You can still see it.
Oh, yeah.
You can still see him doing it.
Cases. We have cases from how they work with al-Nusra or the beheadings of children. I mean, there's so many cases of this. And with Trump, and believe me, I despise this guy. On the Republican primary, he said when all the Republicans were saying, yeah, we need to go in Syria, arm these rebels, he said, who are the rebels? Tell me who they are. I spoke to generals. Who are they? I can't name any of them. And that's a serious problem that we're facing. So at least where he says, hey, I want to work with Putin, many people see that as great. We don't want an escalation with Russia. Will he hold to it? I don't know. Maybe. But at least it's
a possibility.
Banging drum than Hillary.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
But Hillary was banging the war drums.
Exactly so. She was a mushroom cloud waiting to happen. Sam in New York, great call. Many, many thanks to you. Mohammed Murad tweets, Clinton lost because of misogyny is the equivalent to you hate Israel because you are anti-Semitic. Deflection. And Peter McPeeps says this identity politics is eating up America and Obama encouraged it. It's also the SMP's mo. Neil says she just doesn't connect or really stand for anything. They stand for themselves, the Clintons. And someone called Clinton, Mason, says everyone wants an end to all wars and a better, fairer world for all. Humanity and honesty is needed globally. Jerry Springers. I know a little. He bought me breakfast once in a very, very fancy hotel. And I learned that he was really a politician before he was the mayor of a city called Cincinnati, not a small place. And he did have political ambitions. So it'll be fantastic to hear him on Sunday on Talk Radio from 2 p.m. Now, let me squeeze a few more of these tweets in because they're coming in shoals. David Beckham for PM says that's why Jeremy Corbyn will win the next election. And Carlos says until politicians suffer the consequences of their policies, there will be anger. No more career politicians. And Ford said he said a lot of foolish things, but a lot of people believed those things he said. And Sean Caden, my big pal, ex of Australia, says the Donald is realising that this President malarkey might not be so straightforward. I must say he looked, in the meeting with President Obama, he looked a bit like, in the pictures I saw, a bit like a man receiving a tutorial and not quite understanding it. And Simon Brian Anderson says, in Trump's words, what have you got to lose? Let's suck it and see. I suspect that a lot of American voters took that view. What have we got to lose? We've lost our jobs. We've lost our factory. We've lost our public services. We've lost our community. Everything is going down the drain. And Clinton's policies were not only not going to help that, but were the reason for that in the first place. And I suspect that a lot of people decided to suck it and see. And Texter Tad says, I agree with every word of your opening statement. Trump now has a golden opportunity to put right some of the biggest travesties ever perpetrated against the American people. And he could start by getting rid of that abomination of a thiefdom, the US Federal Reserve Bank. Well, Tad, he might have to, because if he's going to cut taxes and increase spending, he's going to have to do something with the great money trick. Here's a tweet from Buster. Can we now rename America Trumpton? Sounds good to me. Isn't there a fantasy place called Trumpton? I think real Donald Trump sees opportunities where no one else sees. Why, he won, so he'll deliver all right, says Millicent Mann. Well, you know, I said many times here, I don't believe that Donald Trump is anything like as rich and successful as he portrays himself to be, although he'll probably be a lot richer by the end of his term. I doubt if he'll run for a second term. I doubt if he'll be re-elected for a second term. Certainly if John Le Boutellier's description of what America is going to be like under President Trump is anything like accurate. But in 4 years, his friends will probably do very well indeed. I see him as a kind of godfather figure sitting in his office, waiting for those probably who traduced him earlier, queuing up to pay him their respect, if you know what I mean. Now, Sue's GR takes issue with the New York Times statistics that I gave you earlier. She says 42% of white women and practically every other woman voted Hillary. Well, the New York Times says that she got 1% more votes from women than President Obama got. So that cannot be true, Suze, that practically every other woman voted Hillary, as well as 42% of white women. The maths on that just don't add up. And I'm sticking with the New York Times figures rather than yours, though if I turn out to be wrong, I'll of course concede it. But my figure is 66% of white women voting for Donald Trump. Charles Grant is the director of the Centre for European Reform, and who better, therefore, to talk with about what all this means for Europe. And at this moment, we're still a European country. So what does it mean for us? Well, one of the things it might mean for us is that Nigel Farage, about whom more later, might actually now be in quite a pivotal position. Some said he's going to become an American citizen and be appointed as ambassador to Brussels, though if Trump wanted to be really mischievous, he'd appoint Farage as American ambassador to Britain. Charles Grant joins me now. Charles, thanks for that.
Hi.
Now, he's not a big fan of the European Union, is Trump. Not a big fan of NATO. And that accounts for some of the, not frostiness, but some froideur in the reactions of European heads of government to the election result, would you say?
Yes, there's a lot of worries in Europe about what Trump means. But you said he's queried NATO, though he said different things at different times about the utility of NATO. He's criticised the Iran deal, whereby America and Europe took off sanctions on Iran and they promised to stop building nuclear weapons. And also he seems to be against trade deals. And the EU well, some people in the EU, not everybody, was hoping to do a trade deal with the US.
This is the TTIP.
That's right. And I think the general view in Europe and governments I've been talking to is they think Trump probably means it when he says he's against trade deals. But when he says he thinks NATO is obsolete, he may not mean it. And the Republican advisors he's got around him will probably steer him back to the more traditional US path of saying the West needs NATO to promote European security.
Well, I hope not, but at the very least, he's likely to say, if you want NATO, you're going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to pay for it just as much as we're paying for it. And places like South Korea and Japan, who shelter under American military protection whilst being economic competitors to the United States. He's on to something on these issues, don't you think?
He's on to something, because it is true Europe has been free riding off the US defence budget for a long time. We've been not spending much money on defence, and America's looked after us. And the same could be said for Japan and South Korea. It's one thing to say, though, George, that the Europeans and maybe the Koreans and Japanese should spend more on their defence. It's another thing to say, well, just NATO, which has been the cornerstone of European stability since the Second World War, will be kind of wound up, or we just won't bother to help you if the Chinese attack Korea or Japan. He's also told Korea and Japan to build their own nuclear weapons, which is slightly alarming for some of us.
Well, we'll not go down that path, because I have such profound disagreements with your characterisation of NATO that it would be a whole show on its own. And ditto TTIP. Most Europeans are against TTIP, aren't they? It's deeply unpopular amongst those who know what it is, at least. I'll grant you that most people probably don't. And it might be that TTIP was dead in the water anyway. And given how hostile he's been to NAFTA, a similar trade deal with Mexico and Canada, a bit of TTIP with bells on it, and the prospect of an Asian TTIP, NAFTA type deal, I suspect he'll stick to his guns on these things.
I think on TTIP, you're right. TTIP was, well, you and I probably have different views on it, but it's certainly true that although most European governments are fairly much in favour of it, public opinion in many European countries is not sympathetic. But I think TTIP is dead. The Trans-Pacific Partnership he's done with a lot of Asian and Latin American countries is dead. I think NAFTA is not dead. The American economy couldn't survive easily without NAFTA. He'll go through the process of the charade of trying to renegotiate it, but I think Canada and Mexico are so closely integrated into the US economy, they couldn't actually end NAFTA, in my view.
Now, Farage likes to claim that Trump is a very, if not Anglophile, then definitely Scotophile, if that's a word, and that we stand a chance of being America's real best friend now that Trump is in the White House. Do you share that?
Well, there is already a special relationship between Britain and the US in certain respects. It applies to intelligence cooperation, some military affairs, and the security domain. But it's really only the Brits who think there's a broader special relationship. When you go to Washington, you don't find very many people talking about a special relationship. I'm sure Farage is right that Trump sees the Brits as good guys whom the US should deal with. But I think we should hold our horses on thinking there's going to be a UK-US trade deal anytime soon. For a start, Trump is not a great fan of trade deals, as we've heard. Secondly, the UK can't legally do a trade deal with anybody else that leaves the EU. And thirdly, I've actually spoken recently to American trade negotiators. They make the point that America wouldn't want to do a deal with the UK till it knows what the state of the UK's own relationship with the EU is going to be in the long term, because that would affect the terms of any deal America wanted to do with the Brits. I think we need to be a little bit cautious and patient about a US UK trade deal.
And we won't know that, will we, until 2 years after Article 50 is triggered, and we don't know when that trigger will be pressed.
Actually, maybe much longer than that, George, because Article 50 is about the divorce settlement, which is a 2-year process, but that's quite separate from negotiating a free trade agreement between the UK and the EU, which may take, say, 5 years, many people think, after we leave the EU. So the long-term relationship that governs economic actors, companies and so on, acting between Britain and the EU, we may not know what it looks like for many years to come.
Mind you, we haven't had an American president who owns substantial real estate in Britain. He owns golf courses and hotels and so on, although they'll be now run by his family, not the usual blind trust, but by his family. So can we expect, you think, an early Trump state visit to Britain?
Well, I'm sure it'd be good for Mrs. May and good for Donald Trump to show that they have friends. And certainly Mrs. May and Boris Johnson reacted to Trump's victory much more warmly than did Angela Merkel or François Hollande. But a little bit of awkwardness in Scotland. He's not very popular in Scotland, Donald Trump, and Mrs. Sturgeon has not been particularly polite to him in some way. So I think although he owns his golf courses in Scotland, he may hesitate before trying to do a state visit to Scotland.
Or he might make one and invite Ruth Davidson, the Tory leader, as his interlocutor to snub the SNP chief, who probably learned a lesson yesterday and the day before about interfering in other people's elections when you're the chief minister of another country. Well, look, it's been fascinating talking with you, Charles. In a word, are you optimistic about things European and British vis-a-vis the US over the next 4 years? Let's assume that Trump's in for the full 4 years and not assume that he'll be in for 8.
Well, let me finish with one sentence that'll touch on a subject you and I probably disagree on. The biggest impact of Trump, I believe, will be a rapprochement between America and Russia, which is good in many respects, but may sell Ukraine down the river. And Trump may say to Russia, look, Ukraine's in your sphere of influence, do what you want there. And my Ukrainian friends are very scared and worried about that.
Well, as you say, we do disagree on that. But Charles, thanks for coming on the show. That was Charles Grant, Director, Centre for European Reform, talking about Trump and the special relationship between Britain and indeed the wider European Union. Let me take some more of these tweets. Pablo says the opportunity was there for change with Sanders and they blew it big time. And Lee in Manchester texts, it troubles me how the far right has managed to take the anti-establishment line owned by the left for so long and use it for their own purposes. How does the left educate others that the right will never represent them? A very profound point, Lee. You know, the French Communist Party used to be the mightiest communist party in the Western world. It had a very popular leader, Georges Marchais. It obtained very high votes, got many members of parliament, and even sat in François Mitterrand's government. They were the defenders of the French working class. They didn't mess around with nuclear weapons, for example. They didn't call for CND with French nuclear weapons. They said, we'll keep our nuclear weapons and we'll point them in both directions. They talked about socialism in the colours of France, and they were root and branch against the supranational globalisation represented by the European Union. And then they abandoned all of that. They went into the identity politics business too. And lo and behold, millions of French communist voters are now voting for the Front National, Marine Le Pen, the fascist leader in France. It is a very salutary lesson. And we've got a rust belt too, you know. There are huge parts of our country that are comparable to Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. Somebody's got to speak for the people there. Somebody's got to have a plan to rescue the people there. Jeremy Corbyn better get more active in doing both those things, speaking for them and proposing a credible plan for them, or maybe Trump's, in a different form, will begin to fill the vacuum there too. That's my fear. Bart Hobson says, your continuous criticism of Clinton makes Trump look like an angel, which he is not. Bart, are you listening to the same show? Are you reading the same stuff that I'm writing as everybody else? Which part of the devil versus Satan, the devil versus Beelzebub, don't you understand? Let's hope for more sense from our next caller. It's Colin in Oldbury. Go ahead, Colin.
Hello, George, all right?
Yes, good, thanks.
Oh, what an exciting, interesting week. Oh, dear. The sleep I've lost. But can I talk about Nigel Farage?
Yes, of course.
Can I talk about the wall?
Yes. You can talk about anything, Colin.
Can I give a birthday shout-out first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Happy 100th birthday to Kirk Douglas on December the 9th this year.
What is he? He must be 90 plus, is he?
He's 100 in 2 weeks' time.
He's 100? My goodness.
Yes.
Spartacus is 100 in 2 weeks' time. How magnificent.
He really is Spartacus now.
Fantastic.
And he walked on his Zimmer frame to the polling station on polling day.
Never to be forgotten, his performance as Spartacus. A wonderful, wonderful actor. Anyway, that's that done. Go ahead.
What a shout-out. Right, the wall. Or shall we go with Farage first? Right, I'd like to know why Nigel Farage was going to European courts and saying, you're a dead husk, you're a rotting corpse, you're no good, all this and that, and the UK will be better off out of the European Union. But now he's going to America, to Trump, to get Trump into the EU.
And
I don't understand what's going on there.
What do you mean he's going to America to get them into the EU?
He wants to be a representative for Trump, I've been hearing.
Well, as part of his demolition job to destroy the EU.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. He said so. He was on with James Whale earlier in the week, and
I'm not up with all of it.
He was quite jolly, I must say.
Oh, I don't know what the plan is with that. I don't understand it.
Well, it's not going to come to pass, I'm sure, but Farage is going to be the British person with most influence on Donald Trump. Of that, I've got no doubt. And his mate, Aaron Banks, I'm sure will be busy in America. I think they might be involved in the Trump TV, which I presume is going to go ahead. So they'll be, they've had a good year. These two, they won the EU referendum, and now their man is in the White House.
It got by me. I was too busy looking at other things to do with the election and that. I heard little snippets, and then I thought, what's that about? So I'm a bit behind on that one.
Yeah, no, don't worry about that. Now, what about the wall? What's your question on the wall?
Well, the wall, I've got a feeling. I think he will get Mexico to start building that wall. I think he'll do a deal with the Mexican government to say, you start building it, if you run into problems, then we will help finish it. I think that's what might happen. And he'll probably say to people, well, they've built enough of that, let's just finish it off. The problem I see... Huh?
Yeah, go on.
The problem I'm seeing is, I'm wondering whether Obama is actually... getting these pardons ready so that when Clinton goes to court, then she will just get pardoned at the end. It'll be like a show, like a reality thing all over again, going in. Everybody will be tuning in to watch it all. And then at the end, she'll be pardoned because all the pardons will be written out.
Well, first of all, I don't think that she's going to be arrested or prosecuted. I don't think they're going to build a wall. It's never a good look. Building a wall, especially as we reach, I think yesterday, the anniversary of the building of the Berlin Wall. I don't think walls are a good look wherever they are tried. But this is America's own business. America,
I do like it.
America has the right.
That things are going. I do like the fact that they seem to have had a bit of a change here. There's like a bit of a reprieve from something that could have been really bad. So I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. But I'm a bit questioning something.
You,
here, you know what I mean?
as Ronald Reagan said, you ain't seen nothing yet. And the reality is, though, the United States has the right to decide who comes into its country.
Yeah.
And who is legal and who is not legal. It has the right to secure its frontiers, even if those frontiers were won by war and brigandry and deception and buttressed by genocide and slavery and apartheid. It has the right, as a state, as the most powerful state, to decide what happens inside its own borders. But I agree with Alistair Hunter, whose tweet I've got in front of me now. Clinton was going to attack Iran and expand the war in Syria. We've had a close shave from World War III. That's the bottom line for me, Colin. All I want...
We've just got to push for that now. We've just got to push it. Look's going again now, because it's all a bit sickly.
Okay, Colin.
Building up.
Thanks for your call, my friend. Christine's on the line in Dorset. Let's hear from her.
Hello, George. I'm
Hello.
a big fan.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's great to talk to you.
Thank you.
But I'd like to make one point and ask two questions, if that's okay.
Yes.
So the first point is, I think Donald Trump is basically about filling his own pockets. That's who he is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he'll he'll probably make a lot of money in the next 4 years.
Absolutely. And so I think really to tell which direction the US is going, that would probably involve looking at Mike Pence and who it was he was allied to before, who I can't remember the name of, and whether that direction's going. So I'd be quite interested in your opinion on that. And also, sort of much more in your area of expertise, is Trump has quite a strong allegiance to Israel, and even though he's apparently not interfering in foreign affairs, would that, leaving Israel to its own devices?
No, I think you're right that he's very pro-Israel, more pro-Israel than President Obama, but less pro-Israel than Hillary Clinton. And so I think you can expect a policy towards the Israel-Palestine question somewhere between the scarcely concealed antipathy, mutual antipathy between Netanyahu and Obama, and what Clinton's absolutely black and white support for Israel would have been. I think that Trump will be less pro-Saudi than Clinton would have been, not least because of the many millions that Saudi Arabia put into the Clinton Foundation and into Clinton's election campaign. I think that he doesn't like the Saudis, probably not for the best of reasons, maybe for some of the worst of reasons, but I think he sees them as something very alien indeed. And don't forget, he's a New Yorker. He's extremely mindful of what happened on 9/11 and that 13 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi citizens. So I think that you may see some change in his foreign policy there. I think you're going to see a change in his foreign policy towards Syria because of the overarching wish that I think he has of making better relations with Russia. And I'm in favour of that. And I think that it is a close shave, as someone just said. We've had a narrow escape from a Clinton presidency.
Yeah.
Okay, Christine, thanks for a great call.
Well, that was very enlightening. Thank you very much.
You're welcome anytime. Now, Rob in Glasgow has a great text. Here's how it goes. After his inauguration, Donald is taken to a back room and shown a film of JFK's demise from a never-before-seen angle. Any questions, Mr. Trump? And it's business as usual. Brilliant, Rob. Quite brilliant. I'm a big fan of the prefab. I remember them in their original in their original form, when people would frankly have dyed their hair to get their hands on a prefab. I'm a big DIY man myself. You'll find me in sundry B&Qs and home bases. I've really gotten into it in quite a big way. I've even bought a power saw. I'll tell you, there's nothing more frightening than a power saw. Let's go to Roger Griffin, who's in Oxford, to talk, I presume, Trump. Roger, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Now, I beg your pardon. Roger, I owe you an apology. You
Why?
are not just a caller. You are the Professor of Modern History and Political
I'm
Theorist
just a caller to you,
at
don't
Oxford
worry.
Brookes University. My mistake, please forgive me. I'll tell you why I wanted to talk to you, Roger. It's on the, and I used the phrase earlier, some of the presence of Trump at these pre-election rallies and the response of the crowd would have, if not chilled the blood, made it run a bit cold. There was something of the Il Duce about him. And you're an expert on fascism, and I wanted to discuss with you what the parallels might be and whether it's overblown.
Well, you've put your finger on the point that a lot of people have responded to Trump as a sort of fascist. There's been a lot of really funny cartoons about him as a fascist and even a Nazi. And some of the protesters against Trump getting in were one of the standard chants and posters were saying that America has elected a fascist. And you are absolutely right to sense a parallel or some sort of reminiscence of the time when Mussolini and even Hitler, but any charismatic leader, can hold sway over a vast crowd who sort of behave like some supine, subordinated spirit, and they'll cheer and laugh at the right times. And it is irrational. It's an irrational sense of collective belonging to the leader. But there are radical differences as well. So.
Tell us some of the main differences, and tell us if you're worried about that.
Well, I'm worried about Trump in his own right as a symptom of something which isn't fascism, but which people like me call populism or radical right-wing populism, and there is a difference. Now, all over Europe now, if you look at the cult of Marine Le Pen, and if you look at the following of Geert Wilders, etc., there are leader figures. They come normally from outside the political establishment, and they talk in very emotive terms about the nation, the people, what it is to be Dutch, what it is to be Danish, what it is to be French, and they conjure up this image of a nation as an organism, as a collective which operates as a single being. Hitler in Mein Kampf says that the purpose of a mass rally is to make the little worm of an individual feel that he is part of a great dragon. Yeah. Now that dragon effect is something which is called populism. To make populism fascist, it has to be revolutionary. It has to want to destroy the system, destroy any form of representative democracy, any sort of countervailing powers or regular elections, etc., and just replace the whole democratic system with a single-party state and a charismatic leader. So if you look at Mussolini or Hitler, or even if you go into Bolshevism, you look at Stalin, these people tried to whip up, and they often succeed, and Lenin certainly did, populist enthusiasm for the new age, the new era, but they are very different from Trump because Trump is still bound by the Constitution. There will be elections. He hasn't even talked about in any of his speeches about getting rid of the constitutional setup in America. And therefore, because he's not a revolutionary, but he's just talking about giving America back to the Americans and making America great again and getting rid of all the threats, he's a right-wing populist. Now, that makes him dangerous in his own right. But the danger isn't fascism. The danger is that millions of people who feel disoriented and they feel they've lost out with modern society, and that nobody in Washington is listening to them, or in the case of Britain, and Farage, etc., in Parliament is listening to them, are wooed and lured by somebody using the rhetoric of being against the system but wanting to take over the system. But in the case of Trump and the other populists, there's no suggestion they're actually going to create a revolution and wipe out the Constitution.
And, I mean, the pattern is not common everywhere, is it? Because you rightly identify Wilders, for example, in the Netherlands, a very small, and although my wife is from there, I hazard to describe it as relatively inconsequential in world politics. You've got in France the Le Pen phenomenon, although she has toned down a lot of the ugliest aspects. We're talking of her father, who was the former leader of the National Front. But in Spain and Portugal, for example, this populism is breaking, you could say, to the left.
I would say that the Scottish National Party has an element of populism when they evoke a sense of Scotland having its own heritage and destiny, etc. Populism isn't necessarily a destructive force, but when it's allied with the right-wing agenda, when it whips up xenophobia, demonizes Mexicans, denigrates women, creates fantasies of American greatness based not on the ability to be leaders in ecological good practice or creating brotherhood of nations, but in terms of military strength and ripping up Paris agreements, then that populism is extremely dangerous, and arguably it's even more dangerous because it's constitutional. And I would draw a parallel there with Putin, who's not a fascist, who's technically a president of a democratic state, but his power is almost entirely based on populist rhetoric and very deep sentiments about Russia, which are profoundly irrational and conjure up ideas that anybody who speaks Russian and has a Russian ancestry cannot exist in the Ukraine, etc., etc. So populism is not in itself a dangerous force, but when it's allied to a right-wing agenda, when it's allied to fantasies about making a country great again through militarism and the sort of cleansing of the nation. Because another part of the Trump agenda is a right-wing agenda about abortions and about the rights of women. A terrible one for me as a British person is what he wants to do with the attempt to create a health service which is affordable by ordinary people. Now, if you look at the history of Mussolini and Hitler, I mean, they came in and they actually created a powerful welfare state. If you were Aryan, you had a lot of health benefits, etc. But because they had abolished the democratic parliamentary system, there was absolutely no way of getting rid of them. And also they took total control of the media. Now, Trump cannot control the media. There is a massive anti-Trump media. There's also Hollywood and TV, etc. Now, he would only be a fascist if he really ultimately wanted to control the media, have a witch hunt like under McCarthy against communists and liberal intellectuals, and he started, as Putin has done, disappearing people who stand in his way. Until he starts behaving like that, he's a straight down the line radical right populist who may well be reined in by the Republicans in his own party, because Congress and the Senate are not outposts of fascist obedience. They have their own tradition, and they regard Trump as an outsider, and they may well be a restraining force on Trump when push comes to shove.
Well, he is a bit of a cuckoo in the nest of the Republican Party, isn't he? He actually isn't a Republican.
No.
I'm not even sure if he's got a party card or had one when he started.
Well, of course, there are parallels with Mussolini taking power. The only bit of Mussolini that is reminiscent of Trump is when Mussolini, people tend to forget this, between 1922 and 1925, Mussolini was the prime minister. he wore a bowler hat and a suit, and he presided over a parliament with different parties in. And if you're going to look at a phase when populism was floating around and it was distorting the democratic process, for example, Mussolini changed the electoral law so that the fascists were guaranteed a majority, for example. And so he fiddled around with democracy. But until he actually got rid of the constitution and declared Italy a fascist state with no representative democracy, till that point he was not actually a fascist. And Trump has no intention. In fact, as a good capitalist businessman, he doesn't want to do things which would be bad for the stock market or bad for his class of plutocrats. So he's a special animal, is Trump, and I'm actually fascinated to see how. I mean, we are used to a string of prime ministers who come in promising all sorts of things and then go out with the tail between their legs. I mean, even Thatcher, people forget, in the final years totally lost the plot, and there was a massive reaction which brought Blair in, and we all know how Blair ended. And there's always this moment of a new dawn where people get very excited, but then the cold light of reality kicks in. What I would say as an academic who specialises in looking at this stuff, and I'll give the listeners a horrible long word, but what Trump and people like, what populists capture is a thing called palingenetic expectancy. And all that means is that millions of disaffected people who feel they've got no place in society or purpose in society cling on to a hope that the person will bring in a brave new world, a new era, wipe the slate clean and make everything good again. Blair came into power promising a new spring. I mean, this is the rhetoric of palingenesis, and always in history it ends in tears. I've never known of a palingenetic movement that delivers and doesn't end up becoming corrupt or ending up putting power in the hands of the wrong people.
Roger, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on the show. Roger Griffin, Professor of Modern History and Political Theory at Oxford Brookes University. Manuel Garçan says when, quote-unquote, real politicians have nothing to say, clowns like Trump, Farage, Le Pen have an opportunity to exploit fear. Well, never was a truer word spoken, Manuel. The reality is, it is the utter rejection and revulsion felt amongst ordinary people for our political class that leads to the rise of the kind of right-wing populism that the professor was talking about just a moment or two ago. So, here's Phil in Manchester on the same subject. On you go, Phil.
Hi, George.
Hi, mate.
Right, so the point I wanted to make is I feel that Trump's election marks the end of a centuries-long dichotomy between left and right-wing politics, which I feel is redundant in the modern world. I think if you look at any Western democracy, you see the same pattern of two or maybe three, if you're lucky, party systems that reach the same neoliberal consensus.
Yep.
They offer no palpable change to the working everyman. And you find them resorting to voting for any kind of change that they can get a hold of. I think the new axis of political debate after the Trump presidency won't be left and right-wing economics. I think it will shift to, quite simply, globalist and internationalist ideas as supported by Hillary, and nationalistic sort of inward-looking policies which got Trump the presidency.
Well, I think that, as I said in my opening remarks, that people want to live in a national economy, because only in a national economy can you have national politics which can be affected by people on ground level through elections, through the exercise of democracy in all its forms. If you have globalist, supranational paradigms, economic and political, by definition, ordinary people in any one place at any one time cannot affect them. And people are recoiling from that. There's no doubt about it. I'm certainly no nationalist, neither Scottish nor British. But I do believe in democracy. And I do believe that the economy has to serve the people rather than the people serve the economy. And the only way you can exercise a hand on that is on a national level, don't you think?
I completely agree. And I think you made a very good point that, I mean, the word nationalist has been tainted by sort of 20th century connotations. But the fact that the nation state needs to be able to control its own economy, whether that economy be right-leaning or left-leaning, it needs to be able to control its own economy and not be dictated to by internationalist agendas, which is what's happening in the modern world today. And I think
you're a clever man, Phil. Are you studying this kind of thing?
I'm not actually. I'm studying medicine, of all things.
Well, you're a very clever man. Thanks very much for that call, an outstanding one. Phil in Manchester. Can we squeeze in a call from New Zealand, where John Leboutillier and I falsely claimed we were going to emigrate to if Trump should win? John, welcome to the show.
How you going, mate? All right?
Yeah, good. You're a Scotsman too. Go ahead.
I am.
I've got to tell you, England are beating Scotland 1-0 at Wembley at the moment. Sorry, hold that result.
Okay.
Hold that result.
Listen,
they've just scored a second goal. It's 2-0.
George, I've got it on right now.
Okay, go ahead, mate.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. I was hoping you were actually going to move to the South Island because I was hoping you'd help me re-establish a socialist Labour Party in New Zealand.
Well, the Labour Party in New Zealand's gone the way of all the Labour parties, hasn't it?
Unfortunately. It has.
It's been PASOK'd, just like the Greek PASOK, like the French Socialists, like the British Labour Party, have moved into complete irrelevance.
Correct. Can I just say, your monologue was spot on, mate. I mean, it's very scary for me because everything that you said was actually a scrambled mess in my head today. However, thanks to you, George, you got all the arguments correct perfectly and you eloquently expressed it. So brilliant, mate. Well done.
Thanks,
well done.
Paul. Now, where are you from?
Originally from Kirkintilloch, north of Glasgow.
There's a good Celtic supporters club there.
That's the one, right?
Big friends of mine. Well, look, John, what's the likelihood of the Trump impact on the Antipodes? I mean, are you so far away that it's not going to impact on you in the way that it will, for example, us here in Europe?
No, it will affect us. Of course it will. I mean, the thing that I find quite silly about it is a lot of people here in politics have been obviously anti-Trump, and now they're scrambling to sort of change their views.
Think about wee Nicola Sturgeon, the Chief Minister of Scotland, who's been insulting Trump daily for the last 12 months.
It's very embarrassing. I mean, I watched online last night, I watched Question Time, and Yvette Cooper and Tasmina were terrible. I mean, she's a lady who's trying to actually ban Trump from coming to the UK. It's just silly.
I told them that at the time. I opposed this ludicrous idea of banning a guy who might, as I put it then, be the President of the United States from coming to Britain. Get a grip of yourselves, I said. And that was a pretty unpopular stand that I took on that. But I was already beginning to form the view that for the reasons I stated in my monologue, Trump had a really, really good chance of winning, and so he has.
Well, a couple of things that I think you missed out on, George, was the turnout of young people was so low. I mean, it was about 19%, and you can't dismiss them. I mean, if they had turned out in the numbers... Yeah,
and they might have turned out for Bernie.
Correct. No, that's the thing. They would have turned out for Bernie. They're peed off, and therefore, why should they vote for a corrupt Clinton, I mean, I'm involved in Labour Party politics in New Zealand, right? And I keep pushing the agenda of engaging with young people, And all it's done for myself, it's verified that. I mean, we need to do two things here, right? And it is to engage the young people in New Zealand, and also we have to avoid the mainstream media. The Labour Party is obsessed by them. They want, every time they put a microphone in front of them, they love to talk to them, right? You don't have to do that. I mean, if you look at what happened to Trump, 90% were actually against him. And yet he still got elected as president. You don't need in this modern day to go down the route of the BBC, Sky TV and the rest of it.
Well, I've just put on my website, georgegalloway.com, for anyone interested in reading it, 2 pieces on this. And in one of them, I make exactly the point that you have just made. Trump bypassed the media completely. He created his own media. He used the new media that exists now to simply bypass a media that was hostile to him. Great talking to you, John, all the way in New Zealand with a wonderful Kirkintillich accent. As I said just before the break, he's abandoned his campaign pledge to scrap Obamacare. He's already removed the ban on Muslims coming into the United States from his website. I've predicted that there will be no wall, either paid for by the Mexicans or anyone else, unless he's got a construction company of his own, and maybe he'll ask the US taxpayer to fund that. We'll be talking to one of the few guests that I've had in the last few weeks who believed that Trump would do it. Now, I had a delightful guest last week who made the point, not unfairly, that Jesus wasn't on the ballot paper this year, and that therefore it was a choice of the lesser of 2 evils. And she plumped being in Nevada for the winner. Well, the House always wins in Nevada, in Las Vegas, and Heidi Harris is here to take a bow again this evening. Heidi, I loved our conversation last week. Tell me, what do you think?
Well, thank you, George. It was great talking to you, too, last week. You know what? It was interesting that Trump didn't win Nevada, because usually Nevada always picks the winner, whether it's left or right. We always pick the president. That was unusual. But the rest of the country, for the most part, not everybody, but a lot of major states chose Donald Trump. And as you and I discussed last week, I think that a lot of people who were going to vote for Trump were underpolled. They simply either weren't speaking to the pollsters, or they weren't being honest with the pollsters, or the mainstream press in America didn't want to acknowledge the fact that there was this huge groundswell of support for Donald Trump. So I knew it would be close, but I really wasn't surprised that he won. I was happy, not because I think he's the greatest, but because I don't like her. But the left-leaning media in this country is just in shock. They had no idea this would happen.
It was amazing to watch, Heidi, as someone who, as early as last May, myself predicted that Trump was going to win. It amazed me that all these highly paid pundits and panelists and pollsters and politicians seemed genuinely to be utterly shocked by the result. But anyone meeting real people and analysing properly the forces that are at work, and not just in the United States, knew that this was a real possibility, don't you think?
I think you're exactly right, and you've hit it right on the head. That's exactly what happened. That these people who are pollsters, these media folks, they're so inside the beltway of Washington, D.C., and they're so inside their little circles, they don't get out and talk to real people, and they don't know what real people think. They don't understand how real people feel, and that's why it blindsided many of them. They just didn't understand how many people were disaffected and tired of business as usual. So, na-na-na-na-na.
Yeah, and they're not on a mission to explain, to get to the truth. They're on a mission to persuade, according to either their corporate or their personal agenda. They are effectively rigging the news in order to bring about an outcome. That's what the media looks like to me. The selection of news, the presentation of news, the twisting of news, the exclusion of voices and the super inclusion of other voices. These are all effectively reducing the mass media to an echo chamber of the powerful, rather than a tool of precision and interrogation and proper investigation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and I'm sure you saw the story that people are wondering if Facebook has too much power, too much influence. Well, it's not about influence, it's about another source of information for people, and it's driving the left crazy that they can no longer craft what we hear. They no longer have control of this. And I'm not saying that everything you see on the internet, you and I both know that's not always accurate at all, but the idea is that people are able to check other sources now that they never could before, and the mainstream press can't stand the thought that they can't control all the information we get. And to your point, craft it the way they want it to be, leave certain things out. So they can't stand the fact that they've lost control.
Well, that's right. And now we have President-elect Trump. Now, in the last few minutes, I've learned that he has walked back from his Obamacare pledges. I'm predicting he's going to walk back from the wall across America, paid for by the Mexican government. I think he's going to walk back from quite a few things, and that's likely to lead to anger and disillusionment, isn't it?
Well, I would think so, but at the time that he was talking about the wall, I was saying, come on, people, who believes this? You know how the United States is laid out. There's a huge river called the Rio Grande that's right there between the United States and Mexico for a lot of that border. What are you going to do, put a wall up there and block off our access to the water and livestock and farming and everything else? And so I always thought that was a dumb idea. You couldn't do it effectively because it would kill a lot of Texas. And so I never believed it, and I couldn't believe that anybody bought that rhetoric to begin with. But, Trump, what he did is he basically tapped into the populism, and that's what pretty much any effective politician does. And then, of course, they back up, and once they get elected, they say, oh, so sorry, I couldn't help you. As a matter of fact, there's a book I'm sure you've read or heard of called How to Win an Election. And Cicero's brother wrote this in 64 BC, and he makes this exact point. He says, promise everything to everyone, and then when you get elected, tell them you'd really like to help, but you can't. That's exactly
I'd better look for that book and read it, Heidi. Now, the reality is that he's there. He's now sacked Governor Christie as the head of the transition team, putting Pence, the vice president, in charge of it. What sort of cabinet do you think he's going to form?
Well, I think he'll probably have people who have been loyal to him, like Rudy Giuliani and those kind of folks, possibly General Mike Flynn, some other people. I think that Donald Trump has surrounded himself so far with some very smart people. And any executive who's successful, no matter how narcissistic he or she may be, is going to surround themselves with people who know more than they do, certainly about specific aspects of their job. And so, Lee Iacocca years ago was quoted as saying, I don't know how to build cars, but I know people who do. And I employ the people who do. So if Donald Trump is smart, which I believe he is, and he surrounds himself with people who know more than he does about foreign policy or whatever it might be, and he's willing to take wise counsel, that, of course, is the big question. If he's willing to do that, I think he could be successful. But, the fact that he's got both chambers, the House and the Senate, and he's the president, a lot of times they have all that power and they don't use it as effectively as they could.
Now, two dynasties died on Tuesday, not just the Clinton dynasty, but the Bush dynasty too, because all the Bushes made it abundantly clear that they were not behind Trump, and Trump won. And so they're done, aren't they? So America might be more like a republic, less like a monarchy in the future.
I hope so. Although I did see some stories that they're already trying to groom Chelsea Clinton for some kind of a run for Congress. Oh, please, enough already with the Clintons and the Bushes. Can we have some new people?
Hear, hear. Heidi Harris, I love you. Stay tuned and let's talk again. Thanks very much indeed. That's Heidi Harris, a radio host, breakfast host no less, at AM 840 KXNT in Las Vegas. Don't their radio stations have marvellous names? Cami says Trump was looking sheepish meeting Obama, well out of his depth. George, do you know anything about the people behind Trump? I've actually met that General Flynn that Heidi was just talking about, but some of the others that are now buzzing around him, some of the far right and the Heritage Foundation and so on, are deeply, deeply worrying people. So we must hope that Trump has the sense to stay their influence. And Buster says if Bernie had half the media support Clinton was given, then he would have walked to the White House with ease. That's also my view. David Keenan says people assume that if you don't support Trump, you must support Clinton. Wrong. They are both bad. Hear, hear. Cool Daddy says Hillary is rather worse than Obama. Hillary is cold, calculating, a cheat, and revels in war. And William sends an email. Well, on the economy, I think we know the implications of Trump. The top percentiles with wealth grows exponentially and the qualitative decline of the standard of living for the poor and the working people of America. One of the other myths that was exploded by the New York Times extensive exit poll was that Trump was supported, effectively, this was the unspoken point, by stupid white men, by white men who didn't have college degrees. And I speak as a white man who myself doesn't have a college degree. But that turns out not to be true also. For a start, he only got 1% more white votes than President Obama got. So much for a white lash. And secondly, Trump either won or was competitive in every education group. The only percentile of the electorate that Clinton won hands down was the very richest Americans. The very richest Americans voted for Clinton in great number, and they outgunned the billionaire Trump very considerably. So much for Clinton being the left of the two candidates. Belzebozo says, what's all this fuss about Trump? Can't be anywhere near as bad as 8 years of George W. Bush, can it? Well, God forbid. Maybe not. Wayne Mack for Palestine says, you mentioned Trump's state visit to the UK, George, but my guess is the Queen would be urging her government not to invite him. Well, it's the Prime Minister who decides, and I expect that Theresa May will be very, very, very keen that the first European country Trump visits should be Britain. Dennis says the left must return to class politics to win in Britain, Europe and everywhere. Well, read my piece on my website, georgegalloway.com. I'm arguing much the same. Now, John's on the line from Germany, and I'm very, very glad that he is, because I was in Germany just the other week and had a wonderful time, wonderful people. Go ahead, John.
Good evening, George. There's two things, NATO and Scotland. I don't know what you prefer to talk about, but...
No, you can talk about them both quickly.
All right. Talking about NATO, as a bit of a Cold War relic myself, I don't see Trump as being the downfall of NATO, because I think that the NATO basically dug its own grave many years ago, just as the European Union did after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when they doubled in size and membership by taking in all these small satellite states and countries from the Baltics, and they undermined the fundamental Article 5, the mutually assured one for all clause, because really I don't think anybody seriously believes that the whole world would go to war if something happened in one of these many Baltic states.
Well, unfortunately, there are some people who would. I mean, I've debated with generals, one general in particular, at Hay-on-Wye, who argued that British mothers will have to get used to the fact that their sons may have to give their life's blood on the streets of Vilnius. And I had to point out to him that that was the very definition of a far-off place of which we knew little, and not many British mothers would be up for that.
No, I don't think so, and I personally don't think they maintain this. But I mean, look what happened in the Crimea. There was a move in there. There was lots of huffing and puffing, but there either wasn't the will or there wasn't the ability to actually do anything about it. And Trump will probably, a practical person, I think that he is, realise that with so many countries not paying their dues into NATO, point one, and the reality, which is that the credibility they have undermined. It's like an exclusive golf club. Once you start taking in every Tom, Dick, and Harry, it's not exclusive anymore. And this is the same thing with the European Union. I think it will be the downfall of the European Union as well. And they've just invited somebody to test whether Article 5, in actual fact, will be honoured.
Well, very interesting. Now tell us, because we've spoken before about Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond, and very foolishly in the case of Nicola as the chief minister, interfering in somebody else's elections in another country and rubbishing the guy who actually won. So that's the definition of a problem, isn't it?
Well, it is, and the tragedy for the people of Scotland is that we have a situation now where we should be entering the golden era of US-Scottish business relationships for tourism. All these people who emigrated to the United States in the 50s, their children, their grandchildren, they should be flocking to Scotland. They will have a president who is actually half Scottish, who is a Scotophile or was a Scotophile, leaving aside all the other baggage that Trump has. Scots have always been practical from a business point of view, and this situation now is a car crash.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's a particularly forgiving sort of fellow, and he certainly hasn't missed the constant traducing of salmon and sturgeon, and he's not likely to forget it. At the very least, he's not going to reward it, and at the very worst, he's going to disfavour Scotland, and that's pretty bad news, isn't it?
Well, correct. The Scottish people are now going to find themselves paying the price for the luxury of Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, Kezia Dugdale et al. To maintain their self-serving, self-righteous, self-indulgent, phony outrage about everything you mentioned in your monologue at the beginning about the racism, the homophobic, the anti-Muslim rhetoric angle. It just beggars belief. And Sturgeon still says she's going to harp on about it. Kezia Dugdale still hasn't obviously got to the idea that the actual election is over. Is
she even back yet? I mean, she was over there campaigning for Hillary. More fool Hillary.
Well, I believe she was back, and that leads me on to the other thing. You've got a free university of the airways where people like me, ordinary citizens, can come on and say what they think, and all I see is the BBC tossing full-toss questions, softball questions to Sturgeon, Salmond, Kezia Dugdale about all of this stuff, the hard questions about the damage it has done to the overarching interests and the financial interests of every single man and woman in Scotland. It's just shrug of the shoulders.
Well, don't worry, John. I won't miss them, and neither will you as a regular guest. Thanks very much indeed. I always hit the target. And let's go to Wigan and talk with Peter. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, hi, George.
Hi.
I just want to say it's a fantastic result that Hillary Clinton, who's responsible for the deaths of millions of people in the Middle East, and let's not forget what she said about Mohammed Gaddafi when he was sodomized with a bayonet, and she said, we came, we saw, he died.
And then she laughed. How she laughed.
And then she laughed hysterically.
Yep.
And that can me at that moment that woman is a psychopath.
Yeah, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with her. Definitely something wrong with her.
Hell-bent on nuclear war with Russia, because war with Russia, Russia doesn't have imaginary weapons of mass destruction, or as Tony Blair and George Bush tried to invent over Iraq. Russia has real weapons of mass destruction.
5,000 thermonuclear.
War with Russia will not be a walk in the park like Libya or Syria or Iraq. And thank God, well, I don't believe in God, actually, George, but thankfully, Hillary has been defeated. But we shouldn't be deluded by Trump. Trump is a right-wing capitalist, and he's every bit as part of the establishment as the Clintons. And the only thing which I can say is absolutely fantastic is that he conducted a brilliant campaign, he lied to the American people, and he got elected. But as we're now seeing, all of his election promises are unraveling. He can't scrap Obamacare. He's backtracked on that. He can't build a wall between Mexico and America unless he wants to declare war on Mexico as well. And
it's a bit much given they stole all these territories off Mexico in the first place, yeah?
Exactly. Exactly. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And the only problem is that in the short term, he will be able to appoint some right-wing lunatics and Dr. Strangeloves into his elite.
Yeah, well, that's obviously a possibility, Peter.
But I don't think he lasts 5 minutes.
But with Hillary Clinton, it was more than a probability.
Exactly.
He could be worse than Obama, but we know that Clinton would have been worse than Obama. So I wouldn't go as far as you and say it's absolutely brilliant, but it's definitely, possibly a good thing. It's definitely, possibly a get out of World War III card, and that's got to be worth trying.
Well,
Thanks for that.
I agree with you on that, George.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Peter, in Wigan.
Yeah.
Simon says MPs should have shown a bit more decorum when joining the hate Trump train. Where will these fools now lead us? Well, MPs is one thing, but chief ministers and prime ministers and foreign secretaries ought to know better. Massive change in Western politics, says Gary, still rolling. It will be interesting to see where it goes and what transpires. New world? ? Not yet. And now Simon says, off topic, the Brit footballers have ignored FIFA threats and donned poppies. Well done, I say, says Simon. Carl says, all the same, say one thing to get power and then backtrack quicker than a rat up a drain pipe. Very vivid. I absolutely agree with you, Ree Clinton, George. We've narrowly avoided World War III. She was unfit to become president. That's from Graham via Twitter. Gareth Adams says women are far harsher critics of their own gender than are men. And Frank Dillon sends an email. American white working class are sick of war, sick of the moneyed ruling elite, sick of being called racists, rapists, homophobic, misogynist, and coming second place to everyone. Ricardo Picasso says, time for the Democrats to drop the dead donkey. A part of that is standing up for a progressive foreign policy. Well, Ricardo, I'll settle for no foreign policy at all. It doesn't need to be progressive. Just stay out of other people's affairs. Atom says, the Democrats and media force corrupt Hillary on us and now want to destroy the country with sponsored protests. And Ken02 says, a nationalised economy run democratically by the working people. Then we can have 100% control and influence. And Celtic Feed says, what are your thoughts on federalism? Seems the biggest difference in the democratic setup between the UK and the US. Well, it's funny that you mention that, because I'm giving 3 speeches in Glasgow on the 21st and on the 22nd at Dollar Academy and in the evening at Aberdeen University. And I'm going to be developing my thoughts on the need for a federal Britain as a means of resolving the national question in this small island. So stay posted. We'll be covering it. We'll be live streaming it and so on. So that's Glasgow on the 21st at Cineworld at Parkhead Forge, and then at Dollar Academy and Aberdeen University on the Tuesday, the 22nd. I didn't set that tweet up, by the way. It just comes to me by rote. Robert Patterson says, we all know what his slogan really meant, make Trump rich again. I think Trump's going to make a lot of money in the next 4 years, and he's going to make a lot of money when he steps down from this position, unless it all goes disastrously wrong. And a lot of Trump's friends are going to do well too. No names, no pack drill. Mario is in Burton upon Trent in Staffordshire, and he's on next. Go ahead, Mario.
Hi, George. Pleasure to speak to you, mate.
And to you, friend. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think in many respects people on the left, and I include myself in that, should sort of welcome our new president-elect, or at least America's new president-elect, in a lot of ways. I think a lot of his policies are going to be the best for the working class, and certainly the best brand of neoliberalism we can hope for in the US. I think what he's proposing to do with foreign tariffs on companies that are moving abroad are exactly the kind of thing that we should have done with the British steel industry.
Yeah, of course we can't as long as we're in the EU. Any such thing is actually illegal. It's one of the reasons why the democratic deficit that we talk about is such a large and important thing. Even if Jeremy Corbyn had been the Prime Minister and John McDonnell the Chancellor of the Exchequer, it would have been illegal to defend the British steel industry. What kind of democracy is that?
Well, none at all, and that's why. Well, not a Brexiteer per se, but I was certainly with you on that one. As was Trump, by the way. He was on the right side of that argument.
Yes.
I'd also like to say that illegal immigration, and I think arguably there's been a lot of dangerous rhetoric around the subject, but it does in fact drive down wages in many areas. Obviously, it's not the operative cause.
Including for the immigrants, Mario. This is a key point on the Latino vote. Yes. You see, it's not just the unlimited immigration, and of course, illegal immigration is by definition unlimited. It doesn't just drive down workers for wages for the workers of a certain colour or stripe. It drives down wages and conditions and jobs prospects for everybody, whatever colour they are, whenever they came here and from wherever they came.
Oh no, I don't dispute it. I'm of immigrant descent myself, so I don't dispute that at all. I'm entirely for legal immigration. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's how countries thrive. So I'm not trying to put across any sort of anti-immigration slant on this argument, but I think illegal immigration specifically, if it's clamped down on effectively, it will help a lot of the working class.
Well, that's right. I mean, look, every country has the right to control its own borders, to say who can come in and who cannot come in, who must go out. Every country has that right, or it isn't a state.
No, for sure. I think we're on the same wavelength here, George.
Mario, excellent. Nice talking to you. Let's go to Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I just wanted to change the subject slightly.
Yeah.
I'm just a bit cross about the poppy. I mean, people wear them for 2 weeks before Remembrance Sunday, and I just think it's gone over the top. A few years ago, I bought a white poppy for peace in the future, and I wore it with a red poppy for the lost blood of the past. And what I just like, really, is to just wear our poppies, if we want both or one or whatever, on the Remembrance Sunday, and why does everybody wear it? It's just gone over the top, and it just makes me a bit cross, really.
Well, in the words of the great Scottish bard Robert Burns, on an ode to a Thanksgiving, the ruling class were planning on a Thanksgiving ceremony for one or other of their foreign wars, and he said, "Ye hypocrites, are these your pranks, to murder men and gie God thanks? Halt, desist, go nae further. God'll no accept your thanks for murder." And the First World War was an act of mass murder.
It was
mass
terrible.
murder by our own rulers and by the rulers of the other imperialist countries. It was a war game involving real people used as toy soldiers, as one of my tweeters pointed out to me today. I used to wear a red poppy. I used to allow my grief, genuine grief for those that fell, to transcend my increasing misgivings about the use to which this whole poppy thing was being put. But I got to the stage where I could no longer do so, because it was clear to me that these hypocrites that want to gie God thanks for murder were actually planning at the cenotaph, planning the next war.
I know.
And I just can't be a part of it. And as I pointed out, I think last week, the bigger the poppy, the earlier worn, the more waxen the face on the faces of the powerful who rule us, the bigger the hypocrite they are. And they vote for war after war. When they're not voting for war, they're planning war, they're pushing for war, and yet they ask us to believe that they're there and wearing these poppies because of a hatred of war. They don't hate war. They love war, these people.
Well, I just think it's just have the one day, and we've all got. I don't know. I'm getting so cross because all I do at the moment is see. It's almost you're not right if you don't wear a poppy, and I don't like it.
No, of course it's become an orgy of militarism and British nationalism, in my opinion. I mean, that young fella that plays for, does he? I think he plays for Everton now, James McLean. He gets booed at every game because he won't wear a poppy.
Yeah, it's wrong.
And he's from Derry, for goodness sake.
Yeah, no, it's wrong.
Where the British Army shot dead 13 people, unarmed demonstrators. What kind of a man would he be if he did wear a poppy, if he did indulge in this kind of orgy of militarism?
It's a private thing. You can or you can't, and you've got to think about it. But it hasn't got to be obligatory. That's wrong.
You're right. Isn't that what our fathers fought for in the Second World War? Against fascism, against barbarism, for the right to follow your own beliefs, for the right to hold to them and express them? Isn't that what the Second World War was fought for?
Well, exactly. And the other thing is, I mean, I know we had conscription. I know in the Second World War, Germany had conscription, and I know that they had no alternatives. I'm not pro, but they had no alternative but to fight for their country, and thousands of those got killed as well. It's, I don't know.
Try millions, not thousands.
Yeah, I know.
Look,
anyway.
Norma, the Second World War was our finest hour. I am in no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But for a brief period, we were all that stood between the triumph of fascism and barbarism and its defeat. And in the event, by a great alliance of our own Commonwealth, but in particular the United States, and most particular the then Soviet Union, which we now are asked to arm up against and threaten and propose war with the people of Russia, who gave 27 million lives. Just ponder that. 27 million dead citizens of the former Soviet Union, which Mr. Churchill said tore the guts out of the Nazi war machine. And without the sacrifice of the Russian people, we'd be having this conversation in German, almost certainly. And yet the same hypocrites that are wearing red poppies and bowing their heads at the cenotaph on Sunday are the people telling us we should now be getting ready for a war with the Russians. You couldn't make it up, Norma.
Oh, I don't know. It's a funny old world, isn't it?
It is. Thanks very much for your call. I appreciate that. Simon says, I agree that with Clinton's loss, we avoided World War III. Other issues can be resolved in time. Trump could have been our blessing in disguise. It's quite a disguise, though. Gordon Miller says, media hate campaign against Trump is dangerous and ugly. Much more dangerous and ugly than Trump. Well, it must be pretty ugly. Simon again, never look a gift horse in the mouth. Fantastic last call about Scotland's leaders damning Trump foolhardy. And Super Predator says, got a feeling Trump has just taken the Republicans for a ride. Thor Alexander says, but will he still #lock her up? Absolutely no chance whatsoever, Thor, of that. And F78, he's so out of his depth and singularly unqualified to be a president. He'll be found out despite all the bluster. Well, how qualified do you have to be, F? George W. Bush qualified? He won 2 terms. Now that the world has stopped turning, according to the media, why are people in shock and awe at Trump's win? It was going to be one evil over the other. If the lazy, lopsided networks gave Dr. Jill Stein a voice, we just might not have ended up with yet another short-sighted warmonger, says Russell by text. Hi, George. When you stated in the run-up to the election that you could not support either Clinton or Trump, I thought that this was a minority view and that most Americans would see this as a binary contest, having to give their vote to one or the other. How correct you were. Nearly half the electorate could not give their vote to either. The two worst contestants in American political history. This is a fact that hasn't actually been canvassed as widely as it might have been. Half of the Americans did not vote, despite a presidential campaign that seemed to go on forever, despite the high stakes, the deeply polarized positions of the two candidates, despite one candidate running on the thesis that the other was a crook, was a monster, and the other literally saying in the presidential debates that if he won, she'd go to jail. I mean, despite all that polarization, despite all that hullabaloo, and despite the expenditure of more than $2 billion, $2 billion, half of the people of America didn't vote at all. And as I've made the point before, it is really something that a country as great as America, with all its achievements, with all its resources, could not come up with two better candidates than Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. It is a truly remarkable thing, and no American that I have spoken to on here has been able to explain it. 52% and proud says the media is absolutely riven with bias. However, I think more and more people are aware of this. Trump and Brexit, he says. And London View says, people can't stomach being lectured on politics by singers, celebs, sports presenters, etc., in the lies of the MSM, rich versus plebs. Yeah, I mean, what's her name? Jennifer Lopez and Jay-Z. I'm not sure quite how good role models they are in a Clinton candidature that is trying to say that the other candidate is some kind of troglodyte with deeply unpleasant views on, say, women. Marie McFarlane says the right-left politics is a result of decades of dialectical process. The next stage is reaction against the right. What I can confidently predict, Edward, is that the word dialectical will not be mentioned on any other radio station in Britain and will probably not even be mentioned on any other show on Talk Radio. You see the brains of the people who are listening and communicating with us. And Dan Burns, 1111, says left or right, both wings belong to the same bird. And Alan McHugh, 64, says, do you think that President-elect Trump will invade Scotland and turn it into a massive golf course? Well, having just looked at the miserable, truly miserable defeat that the Scottish national football team has suffered, maybe he could take a game there. Maybe he could do something to lift Scottish football out of the depths into which it has presumably sunk. I didn't see the game, but 3-0 speaks for itself. PLW says, word on the street says Mexico will build a wall to keep the Americans out. Very good. Simon says Clinton was so arrogantly unaccountable she couldn't bring herself to address her loyal supporters when she lost. Well, the story today is that she couldn't stop crying. And I personally find that that has the ring of truth. She absolutely believed in her sense of entitlement that she could and should be the nominee and that she would win and indeed had won. I think that the outcome came as a devastating blow to her. And I still believe, notwithstanding the point Heidi made earlier about Chelsea Clinton running for Congress, maybe, I've nothing against the girl, I've never heard her speak, and I've seen her since she was a child on the television and so on only, but the Clinton dynasty is over, and so is the Bush dynasty, and that's a good thing. Now, Michelle Obama, on the other hand, well, she says she's not interested, but a lot of people seem to be interested in her. And Supernaturally Sun says WikiLeaks illustrated this, showing Clinton orchestration of the MSM campaign and now backpedaling on Trump. It's absolutely true, you know, that they rigged the Democratic campaign. They rigged the primaries, and they rigged it against Bernie Sanders, the one man that could have beaten Trump out of the park.